Ally is not a label you can give yourself. Ally is a label that someone in a community that you're helping needs to give you that label. You should just authentically be a person who acts on behalf of people who have no privilege. If that's who you are, then I will give you the label ally. You don't have to give it to yourself.
Just to quickly let our viewers know about Video Out, can you just tell us briefly what is Video Out, how are you related to Video Out, and how long have you been working with Video Out?
So we started in 2016 as a project just to record the stories of LGBTQ people. And we traveled mainly all over the United States, recording folks in small towns and rural communities, and also in the big cities like New York and Chicago. And over the last 5 years, we've morphed into this national nonprofit with programming that serves demographics all over the country. And over the past year, since the pandemic, we've really been able to reinvestigate our mission and see where we can really have the most impact. So we've morphed into what we call an education and advocacy organization. So we're taking all of the stories that we recorded and now we're wielding those as tools for good and positive change. So we'll be contextualizing all of those stories with educational materials and then giving those educational materials to people who are doing activism and advocacy on behalf of the LGBTQ community.
If I would simply ask, like, the top 3 motivating factors that keeps you guys going towards the field, towards the community?
I think one for me is definitely queer joy. One thing that we don't see enough of is that we're multifaceted. We are way more than just our queerness. We're way more than just our transness. That is part of us. That is our magic. That's what sets us apart, but also like includes us in this big story of shared humanity. But we have passions. We have things that really excite us. We like Star Trek. We like cooking. We like, go camping. We like all the things that make us unique and connect us to other people as well. And I think often when we talk about LGBTQ activism, it's usually that we point out things like the average life expectancy of a trans woman of color is only 35 years old in the United States. That number decreases when you go to different countries who have even more oppressive laws. LGBTQ youth in the United States are 120% more likely to be homeless. 1 in 3 trans youth attempted suicide in the last year here in the United States. So a lot of times when we talk about LGBTQ advocacy, we hear about the plight of the community. We hear about how hard it is. But I think what we want to normalize, we want to engineer a new normal, which is that queer people are joyful, we are happy, we are whole and complete, and we deserve to live in that existence, not just always fighting for survival. We deserve to be happy and whole and to have a smile on our face and walk down the street in our authentic selves, knowing that the world is going to be on our side. And that's really the primary motivating factor for me, just joy.
The lens of gender and sexuality, even if you're asexual or don't identify with a gender, there's still the construct of sexuality and the construct of gender that bisects every other identity, whether it's ethnic identity, racial identity, ability, profession, all of those other factors in the way that we identify has an opportunity to bring together an extremely diverse group of people. And one of the things that I really love and like to focus on is stories and history and culture told by a multi-narrative perspective. it's one of the things that we are talking about in building out our educational resources, that we don't want them to just be told by a singular perspective. Similar to history textbooks in schools, most of the history textbooks I grew up in are all about the white male settlers of the United States and the founding fathers and the people who documented US history. It's not told from the perspective from other perspectives. So I think that's one of the things that excites me. It excites me when I go to a really good LGBTQ conference, is having issues like anti-racism in the LGBTQ community, talking about all different factors, or thinking about what kind of ability services are available, translation, or is there sign interpreting, thinking sort of thinking about so many different perspectives and their needs, I think gives a real holistic picture of humanity that, to me, that excites me, to be able to connect with people who identify not only as LGBTQ, but also as really differently than I do, and be able to learn about that. And it feels like a really enriching experience in life to be able to know so many different people.
So when I was reading about Pride and why it is called Pride, so it had to do with the Stonewall fight for equality that Marsha P. Johnson started, and that's how it became, like, it was called Pride Month. So I wanted to ask you, what is the one thing that you take pride in as a member or an ally of the community?
I think another reason that we do the work that we do is to, as Katy was saying, like, get to know all of the people in who are like us living today, you know, this fabric of humanity. But another thing is to get to know the history, who are the people, the places, events in the past. And, you know, I think in the United States, one of the big, I don't want to call it a myth, because we really do have there's a lot of solidarity behind the story of Pride, especially around the Stonewall uprisings. But the truth is that there have always been LGBTQ people, and they've always been fighting for a place at the table, for equality, for liberation. So Stonewall was a culmination of generations of LGBTQ people in this country fighting for their rights. You know, it actually, there was a guy in Germany in the 1800s named Max Hirschfeld, who inspired a US citizen named Henry Gerber in the early 1900s to start an organization here called Society for Human Rights, and that was in Chicago. He wrote a newsletter. The next day was arrested because it was considered indecent to be a homosexual. And Henry Gerber inspired someone named Harry Hay, who in the mid-1900s started an organization called Mattachine Society. Around the same time, another two people, Del Martin and Phyllis Lyons, started an organization called Daughters of Bilitis. And that was like a lesbian organization that was existed for equality. It was an alternative to these places that were constantly being raided by the police. Then you had all of these activists in the early 1960s, even before Stonewall, doing all of this work. Compton's Cafeteria, which is where a group of trans women in San Francisco had an uprising. And that was one of the very first times there was police resistance documented in the community. That was before Stonewall. And then in 1966 in New York, we had what was called the Sip-In, which was when a group of people went around to different bars and they were ordering drinks saying, "Oh, I'm a homosexual, will you serve me alcohol?" It was illegal at the time. That was 3 years before Stonewall. And then Stonewall happened, which was, again, this culmination of all of these events. And the community finally said, enough, we're not doing it anymore. And Pride was, Pride was an acronym. There was actually an organization in about a decade before the first Pride demonstration that was called Pride. The organization was named Pride. So the Pride March wasn't the first time that the word pride had been used. So Pride has a long history, and it's way more than just about being proud of who we are. It's about resisting and actually fighting for liberation. So the first Pride March was not a parade. There was no corporate sponsors. It wasn't about, highlighting something that everyone celebrated. It was about a group of people that were hated in society, getting together and demanding that they be viewed as equal. People were marching in the streets, stopping traffic. Police were everywhere. It was not a welcome event. So I think the thing that I'm most proud of now is that we have a history of standing up for ourselves and demanding that we are equal. About saying, I'm proud of my team, Katy and Dustin and Selena, for doing this work and saying, like, we demand more than we have been given so far. We demand that we go all the way, and that LGBTQ people all over the globe are considered not just second-class citizens, but people who are equals, people who are viewed as magic and exceptional because of who they are and their accomplishments, because of the content of their character, to borrow from another social justice movement. I think that I'm proud that living authentically is now, for the very first time in my life, and perhaps for the very first time in history, it's starting to be viewed as a good thing, as necessary. No longer are we starting to fit into, are we required to fit into this very unimaginative, boring, harmful stereotype of humanity, which is a cisgender, at least middle-class existence. Now, no matter who you are, you should be valued. You should be treasured and accepted because you are human, and that's really important. So I'm proud of this movement, not just in the LGBTQ community, but in humanity, to value people just because of who they are.
If I ask you that, what are few things that you wish that people knew more about the community?
I mean, one of the things that comes to mind right now when you're thinking about myths is there's ways in which throughout history that we've been perceived as dangerous and as a threat to other humans. And right now, I think one of the ways that's being targeted is towards trans people in particular, and thinking about trans female athletes who, are being restricted from playing in sports out of a fear that they would have an unfair advantage, and that unfair advantage is insurmountable in the eyes of authorities to let these kids play in a sport that feels like the appropriate team based on their identity. I think breaking down some of that, there's not actually evidence that has been mounted yet that there are girls playing in sports that are having an unfair advantage. I think there's a lot of fear around bathrooms and locker rooms and what bathroom is the most appropriate bathroom for these students to go in. I think there's a lot of fear around, there's fear still from outside the community that LGBTQ people are somehow perverted in some sort of way, or that I feel like that fear around the bathroom and the locker room, as if somebody's not going to conduct themselves in an appropriate way with boundaries around how they're going to behave around with other people in a bathroom or a locker room is the same fear that originated that LGBTQ people shouldn't be able to be in positions where they take care of children or are teachers or are mentors, where they'd be in a position where they would be in one-on-one interaction with a child because they're not fit to do so. To me, I see that as the same sort of extension. And to me, it's anything that's fear-based. When you have more exposure and you have education and you have real life examples, those usually break down. Of course, there could be an individual who's a predator in any community, but to make a whole group of people out to be inappropriate in some way because of a part of their identity has been shown over and over in history, not just in the LGBTQ community, as a way to discriminate and oppress a group of people.
And I think, you know, that same sort of fear is mounted against anyone who's different, right? And we're seeing that in the LGBTQ community against trans people, as you said. That's one of our key areas of focus right now, but it's also this sort of global awakening against racial injustice in places where people of color, for instance, are being still disproportionately mistreated because of the color of their skin. And I think to build on that, what we're actually doing is a disservice to society, because when we treat others differently because of who they are, we impoverish the whole. Not just the people who are different, but you're actually doing yourself a disservice too. I mean, think about all the contributions of LGBTQ people alone. You know, think about all the things that they've said, all of the things that they've written and sang and danced. How much poorer would society be without those contributions? So I think we just got to get over whatever it is. As Katy was saying, maybe it's fear. Maybe that fear stems from traditional family values or religion or politics. Anything that you're steeped in, that if you take a step back and you say like, whoa, is the way I'm thinking actually preventing me from enjoying life to the fullest? Is it actually preventing our society from being as rich and full as it could possibly be? Then it's time for you to say like, oh, maybe I need to change my traditional family values or my religion or my politics. Maybe I need to think more about love. Maybe I need to start embracing people for who they are instead. So yeah, I think that's a good point, Katy, that fear is not the answer, love is the answer, but an active, radical love, a love that accepts no matter what.
With that, I also want to know that how do you think that corporate employees can be authentic allies for the community?
I think more, of course, nonprofits can always use money. That's very useful, but I don't think that necessarily speaks to the authentic allyship. I think doing something that actually creates some either personal vulnerability in being able to share one's own story, for instance, or an opportunity to personally learn about a community by volunteering one's time or engaging in a event or program that actually takes participation is ultimately more powerful. You know, as Jordan said before about Pride, that, you know, it's not about these corporate sponsorships, you know, corporations that decide, we'll just throw some money at a Pride float, feels like incredibly superficial in terms of the support for the LGBTQ community, if that's sort of the only box that corporation checks and being able to support LGBTQ people, but actually finding ways that LGBTQ people can engage, whether it's in a workshop or training or volunteering their time with an organization, sharing their personal stories, having cisgender and heterosexual employees listen to those stories to be able to develop empathy. I mean, there's many ways that we learn to grow as humans by hearing stories that are different from our own.
I live in a country where being white is very valuable, and your whiteness is a set of privileges that are just given to you. So even as a queer, trans, non-binary person, my whiteness gives me privileges. So to be an ally, you have to take stock of your privileges, and you have to say like, oh, I'm able to do certain things because I have these privileges. And the other part of that is you have to know who in your community does not have privilege. And then you have to say, well, I'm going to wield my privilege as a tool to ensure that everyone who does not have privilege is treated the same as me, who does have privilege. That's, I think, the best way to define allyship. So it's not just about, as Katy said, giving your money or just doing the bare minimum. It's about educating yourself and really diving into making humanity equitable for everyone. So, for instance, if you can live your life walking through the streets, going to the stores, going to work, and you're comfortable all the time, knowing that there are people who are living on the streets homeless, or who have no food, or who are being arrested for things that a white person is not arrested for, or any injustice. If you can go through your life with not recognizing injustice, you are not an ally. If you are actively working to end injustice, then you could consider yourself an ally. But one of the people that Katy and I love so much that helps out video a lot, his name is Sam White. And Sam once said that ally is not a label you can give yourself. Ally is a label that someone else has to give you. Someone in a community that you're helping needs to give you that label. So if you are using the term ally to give yourself credit or to get followers or to have some sort of social credibility, then you're probably not doing it right. You should just authentically be a person who acts on behalf of people who have no privilege. If that's who you are, then I will give you the label ally. You don't have to give it to yourself.
If there is one thing that you stand by, one quotation, Katy and Jordan, that gets you through the day or when days were really tough, so what would that be?
There's actually a Jewish liberation activist named Emma Lazarus, and Emma said this quote that we use all the time, and it is, "We are none of us free until all of us are free." So I think for me that means that there's intersections of activism. It's, of course, we work in the LGBTQ space, but it goes for everyone. If there's anyone who's not free, then none of the work that we're doing matters until all of us are free. If there's one person who's still experiencing injustice, then we can't rest. I can't go to sleep at night knowing that I'm not doing everything I can do unless everyone is treated equally. So we are none of us free until all of us are free.
We have been working in this space as well, and we have been consistently getting in touch with the corporate volunteers as well and corporate organizations as well to find such people who are interested basically for working towards the communities. We hope that we find you most suitable of volunteers for your cause, and like whatever we can do to share your cause, and like you to call us an ally. So it would be really great for us.
I would say the first step to be learning how to become an ally of any group is listening, which you guys are doing, and extending kindness.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much.